Hello, everyone, and welcome to another live stream of Dragon Plus. This is our new live stream show that will be taking a look at our Dragon Plus magazine content, but also diving into the design, the development, and the running of D&D content in general. Last week, we spoke with Adam Lee regarding some Tomb of Annihilation material, including his fiction. This week, we wanted to dive a bit more into the Tomb of Annihilation in terms of running games, and so for that, we've invited two talented guests to be with us today, Chris Lindsay and Lauren Urban. Chris Lindsay, I know you've been on the podcast and the live stream before, but for folks that might be tuning in newly, who are you in terms of your role here at Wizards of the Coast?
I do a number of things. Primarily, I am the product manager for Dungeons & Dragons, and then I'm also in charge of the Dungeons & Dragons Adventurers League and the architect and maintenance guy for the Dungeon Masters Guild. So and basically I just dream up new things for people to make me work really hard to make.
So just a few small things here at Wizards.
Just a couple of things. Yes.
And Lauren, I know most people might know you from your moniker Oboe Crazy.
Yes.
So how would folks know you? You've already got fans in the chat that have been talking towards you.
My mom's in the chat. Great. Hi. I run a little podcast called Dungeon Drunks, and we've been doing live play D&D for a while that we've raised money for charity and just in general had a lot of fun. And I do a lot of stuff to get really happy about some of the stuff that you're doing. Anything that gets more people playing D&D makes me happy. So that's mostly what I do, is play D&D so other people want to play D&D.
And play oboes, if I'm not mistaken.
I haven't managed to play oboe while playing D&D just yet. I'm still working on that. I've played a bard before, literally and figuratively, but there's only so much you can do with the oboe in your mouth.
Right.
So
maybe a background soundtrack for things.
We need to get the symphony to come in and live play while someone is playing D&D in front of them.
That sounds awesome.
Like the video game orchestra, except with D&D. That'd be amazing.
Let's do this.
We have the keyboardist in Dragon Friends. So yeah, if we go full symphony.
Benny and I, we've got this.
Yeah.
We'll do it.
Right.
It'll be great.
We'll plan for it. It's happening.
Symphonic D&D.
I love it.
To you live.
So unless I'm mistaken, the last time that the two of you played Dungeons & Dragons together was at our Stream of Annihilation event in June.
Yes.
So I wanted to ask about that, and it was a bit of an oddity as far as a game. It was One Grung Above. Was that the actual name of the game?
Yeah, that's what I called it. The Grung are inherently normally a lawful evil race, and they are into basically finding hapless people who they stumble into in the jungle, and then basically enslaving them using various poisons and toxins and so forth, and putting them to work to take care of the higher level Grung. The different colors of the Grung basically denote status inside of their society. It's very much a caste system. So they're very lawful evil, and politics is key. You would never think that frog politics would be a big thing, but politics is key to Grung society.
So obviously they were interesting creatures. They play very much a part of the Tomb of Annihilation campaign setting. We're looking at some on our screen right now.
Aww.
Oh, yeah. You would never think there was a politician in there, but there is.
Middle management. I seem to remember doing a lot of middle management during that game.
It worked out so well for role playing. I was just watching the repeat of that. We're going to vodcast that game actually after.
Right on.
Nice.
This as well. So I guess my question is, was there anything in particular about Grung that you wanted to design an encounter for? Just their sheer coolness?
Well, I actually have been the champion of the Grung since we started talking about making Bolo's Guide to Monsters. There were a number of heated discussions about whether or not they would be in the book, and at one point we were all given a golden ticket for one monster, and despite the lack of support that Grung had received, I put them on my golden ticket and guaranteed their entry into the book. But at that point, like so many other things I do, that got me the task, probably the enviable task of taking a swing at redesigning and reconcepting the Grung from days of old. So, and that's why I just like, okay, I created these things and I put them out there, and with the help of Matt Sternett, we colored them up, and let's do something with them so that people know they're around.
So you chose the Grung, and I guess my question is, as a dungeon master myself, I'm always interested in creating material. You had a game slot for Stream of Annihilation. It was about 2 hours long, maybe an hour and a half long.
Yep.
How did you go about designing an encounter for that given time period?
I over-designed. Is what I did. The focus,
like every DM.
Yeah, like every design. I had probably 4 times as much content than as I needed. And so when I put it together, really it was about identifying a villain, creating a goal, and then from that point on, establishing where the characters needed to go to accomplish their mission. And then, and then basically I went classic Dungeons and Dragons, and I created basically a mini little dungeon for them to explore. And they more or less explored that dungeon. They didn't hit every single room along the way, so there might be things,
Matt Colville certainly tried.
Left behind. But yes, they certainly tried.
So was that a choice? You love the Grung, you had a lot of material, but you also wanted extra avenues for the players to potentially not go down and give them the actual choice as opposed to an illusion of choice?
Exactly. I wanted to actually make an area and then just kind of like a little sandbox, and then drop them into the sandbox and see what they did. And what happened defied explanation by me, as all of the players really jumped into character.
Yes.
For the Grung, and at some point I felt very superfluous to the game, like I was just another watcher of what they were doing and all of their antics, and that was kind of awesome, I won't lie.
It's a great moment when your players just kind of take over. I mean, giving them something to play with and then watching them create. Here's some Play-Doh, go nuts. It's amazing. It's a great feeling.
So, Lauren, I wanted to ask, from the player's perspective, how much material were you given in advance? I mean, clearly, I don't believe you guys had played Grungs before.
No. How much did we have in advance? Well, we got the character sheets, and you had either tweeted out the images of all of the Grung, which were kind of enough for me. I got to be Grung Hawkeye, and that made me happy. It's pretty much all I wanted out of life, was to be a tiny little frog with a bow and arrow. So we got the characters beforehand, just their stats, and then had some time to talk amongst ourselves. And I think you'd warned us about the caste system, who could talk to who, and how that would work.
Exactly.
And that was about it, I think. Yeah, that's really all we needed. The who you were allowed to talk to and who you needed to take orders from was the basis for pretty much everything in my mind.
Yeah.
It made my life super easy and super hard at the same time because I was middle management. I got to watch all the Green Grung be the Four Stooges, and the Grung above me got to be haughty and in charge, and I was just trying not to die.
Well, it played out great. Again, we're talking about the game from Stream of Annihilation. If you haven't had a chance to see it yet, we will vodcast it after this live stream in advance of Maze Arcana, so folks can see exactly what it is that we're
sitting there and watching Lauren's blood pressure visibly rise for the hour and a half was... And instead of it being mine, was absolutely priceless. I was just like, her face just got red.
Yep.
And I look over at Colville. No, he doesn't care.
No. No, it was super cool. It was, I'll say this, it made my role-playing really easy because it gave me... Because I was the only one that could talk to everybody. And once it clicked that, that's my job, is I'm the drill sergeant, I'm middle management, it made my role-playing choices super easy. And then the four gents got to go nuts, and I kind of got to just play along. It was amazing.
I guess I don't know. You know who you can and can't talk to. Do you know everyone else's parameters and restrictions, or were you only given yours for your character?
I think we all knew.
Okay.
Because you had to, or else you could have accidentally talked to the wrong Grung, and then and then there were consequences. But but yeah, I didn't have to worry as much about who I talked to, just how I talked to them.
Got it. Chris, you work obviously with the DM's Guild. In terms of designing sort of these scenarios and encounters, is there any general parameters or guidelines for folks interested in being involved with the DM's Guild, creating material for that, for something that might be a little shorter on the scenario side of things?
Yeah, I keep it simple. I mean, give yourself a finite amount of space to kind of work in, right? I mean, you can always give the illusion of being in a vast jungle, because I let them know that they're in the jungle and then they're traveling from point A to point B. But traveling from point A to point B happened in the span of a couple of short sentences, and then once they got to this place, it was, relatively clear this is where you needed to be, and so they had to explore at that point because they'd never seen this little area. So I would just say, give yourself some constraints as a designer. I of course had the gift of using a couple of fantastic maps created by Dyson Logos. His maps are genius, and he puts those online for people to pilfer and use for their own games. I would say talk to Dyson if you need maps, because he creates them daily. He's fantastic, and they're nice, clean, easy to use maps. And I just basically said, okay, what am I going to put in this little 5-room area? And I just filled it out and then let them go nuts.
Nice.
So I have to ask, because as a dungeon master who creates so much of her own content, but it's all in notes in my crappy hand scroll and Google Docs, and I make up so much as I go along, and I see DM's Guild, and I would love to put stuff out there, but I'm a DM who creates her own content to, here's a piece of content that I would like to offer for people that doesn't sound crazy. What are the skills that I don't necessarily have as an improviser to turn that into an architect?
It really is just a matter of so when you're writing an adventure, you go from this creative part, like you were describing, right? You're talking about coming up with all these really cool ideas, and you jot down some notes and stuff like that, right? There is a point, however, where you become a technical writer, and you have to sit down and kind of formulate those into a series of basically explanations, assuming that just imagine that you're talking to somebody and explaining to them, this is how you're going to run my adventure, or this is how you're going to use this content. And that's generally the tone you take. You can be as entertaining as you want to be in that regard. But it's just really important, is everything that you could possibly think of that you would put in that encounter for yourself, just put in there. It's okay to not hit every single possible thing that could happen in an encounter. That's why dungeon masters are dungeon masters. They'll read it and they'll go, okay, and then my players do something crazy. Well, now it's time for me to make something up.
This was a question that had come in from Twitter in advance. As a dungeon master, and I suppose this goes out to both of you, what frustrates you most?
As a dungeon master?
As a dungeon master.
Players talking over each other. Players not listening to each other. Players deciding what they want to do and deciding they're going to go off and do it without at least listening to the other players. Trying to be the one with all the answers when there are other people with answers. And sometimes that's awesome when you've got that kind of player who's all gung-ho and ready to go. But when you've got 2 or 3 of them, or you've got a player who's a little bit more of a sit-back player and wants to think about things, or is more choosy about when they talk, making sure that they're not constantly overridden, that can get frustrating.
Which I imagine is an extra difficulty, because that is I suppose, a soft skill as opposed to a hard skill of design work.
Yeah.
Where now you're at the table and it's a player management, as opposed to, oh my God, they've gone off the map. What do I do?
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's a social skill.
The only thing that really kind of rubs me the wrong way, not the only thing, but the main thing that gets on my nerves, particularly if I'm running in a public setting, with players that I may not have played with before, is a player who will attempt to play other people's characters for them. Is absolutely no good, no bueno. You can't do that at my table. And I will stop that player and shun them into quietness so the other players can make their own decisions. Because those other players are there to have fun. It's not just about that one person and their experience.
Yeah.
So conversely, then, what do you what inspires you in your creation, or playing around the game, running the game, or creating the material for it?
Oh, creating material. My inspiration comes from everywhere, but I spend a lot of time, probably too much time, asking my players outside of the game. So, what do you want to do? Before the game, tell me about your character, tell me about your backstory. Hey, why are you playing D&D? What is it? Oh, you watched this show or that show. Tell me your favorite moment in that show. And then it just happened with Dungeon Drunks. We kind of finished a chapter, and so they're back in Waterdeep, and they're having some time to relax, and I have peppered my players outside the game with what did you like about the last couple of months? What would you like to do now? And those answers have always been inspiring or exciting or, ooh, really? Mining them for what they want to do makes me excited.
And I'm making an assumption that there's a bit of trust over time that has to build for them to feel comfortable coming to you with a specific Christmas list as opposed to whatever you get me is fine kind of thing. Like I'm looking for this or that, or are there players that just are naturally comfortable giving you those expectations earlier on?
I think the longer someone's played D&D, the more they're willing to tell you exactly what they want, and they've got the lexicon to do it. Players who have played for years, and not just in my game, but in other games, they know, well, I thrive off of the role-playing, so I want you to mind my backstory, so they're going to give me the 10 pages of their backstory. The players who are kicked down the door and let me go fight things are going to give me I really want to get a new sword, and I'm not really happy with my armor, and they're going to give me the laundry list of things I want to buy.
Right.
And
a new door, apparently.
All
the
doors.
Kicked out, yeah.
Yeah, I want the fake door
right.
in my house that I could just repeatedly kick in and then fix. I would like a mimic, please.
That's how they come home. They kick in the door when they, yeah.
Please give me a mimic for Christmas. So yeah, the newer players, when I started Dungeon Drunks, I was very lucky that two of my players had really never played D&D before. And so when I was asking them, it wasn't that they didn't want to tell me what they wanted. They didn't know what they wanted.
Right.
They didn't know. They'd never had the experience. So it was a lot more leading questions. It was a lot of, okay, what excites you about Lord of the Rings? What excites you about when you watch Marvel movies? Do you like the fights or do you like the character interaction? That kind of thing.
So before it kind of steers nicely into campaign creation, which I wanted to touch on next, but just quickly, Chris, did you have any particular points of inspiration that spark you in running or creating games?
It could be anything, like Lauren said. For me, it's anything from stuff I've read, comic books, novels, movies. The odd one that I like to throw out there is occasionally I like to listen to like orchestral soundtracks. And occasionally I'll be listening to one and I'll picture something in my head and I'll jot that down. Right? Because it's just taking the music in a specific mood, and you're thinking, oh, if I'm playing this while I'm playing the game and if I'm doing this would be really cool. So
nice.
So now I got to know, what are you listening to right now? What's on your current playlist?
I just got the soundtrack to the King Arthur movie that Guy Ritchie did.
Oh, yeah.
It is fantastic. Yeah. It's so good.
Nice.
So as mentioned, I wanted to steer it into campaign creation, and again, as we've talked on the off camera, for ulterior motives, we're in discussion with both of you about developing new live stream programming, upcoming games at a future time. So we haven't really locked anything down, so I don't want to go too far down those roads. Although,
sure.
Chris, I know the Grung might be making a reappearance in your particular game.
Yeah, I am looking at, for streaming purposes, I am looking at bringing the Grung back, finding a way to start from where we left off at Stream of Annihilation, and then still maybe bring people up to speed that haven't perhaps been watching it. But I am still very deep in the planning stages for that Grung game, particularly since and everybody out there is super, super busy. And we had a lot of cool people on our table playing, but most of them are really, really busy. So I only have about half of that crew coming back. So the challenge for me is to have them continue playing with their characters and then introduce perhaps a couple of new characters along the way, and how to do that and how to go through the challenges. And then, of course, you give the other two characters, this is what I'm actually looking forward to, their own personality, and to see the interaction that's going to happen between the established group and those new characters and how they fit in.
Nice.
So I'm excited about that. And I imagine, I'm hoping that I'm going to get to a point where I'll be able to do the same thing I did before and bring out the popcorn and sit back and watch talk to each other.
I'd like that too.
That would be awesome.
And Lauren, is there anything that you can at least tease about, maybe where your thoughts are as far as the campaign or games you're interested in sort of developing? Or is it all TBD at the moment?
I think most of it is TBD. I can say that the part of it that excites me the most whenever I've got a new group that I'm going to DM for, like I talked about before, is peppering them with questions. I am excited about the moment where I get to play 20 questions with them and say, so, have you played D&D before? What do you like? What don't you like? Oh, if you haven't played D&D before, what movies do you like? What books do you read? Have you watched D&D? That's the number of games that are out there that people just watch has been such a boon, because I get now to talk to people who have never played before but have a frame of reference and say, oh yeah, on Critical Role when I watched this thing happen, or on Dice Camera Action when I watched this thing happen. And I'm like, oh, okay, that's the kind of player you'd at least like to be. So yeah, just having the moment to sit down with potential players and find out what they want, because that's, as I said, that's where my inspiration comes from. So there's only so much I can do before I can go, well, they want to do this, and all right, so we'll move this over here, and then all the Lego pieces happen.
So there's perennial questions about dungeon masters who are starting off the skill of dungeon mastering in general. Once they run a game or two, then they get hooked. They're interested in starting their ongoing campaigns. So you're starting to go down that road already, which is, if you are interested, if I'm a dungeon master, I'm newer, I'm interested in starting a campaign, how do you go about that? And I know we've talked about the session 0 and the questions that you put out for your potential player group. Are there other things that you like to keep in mind for, okay, I want to run a campaign, and here's how I get that foundation built?
Well, if you got the players already and you've kind of gone through those questions, the only other things I like to do, are you going to run from a module, or are you going to make up your own thing? And both of those are fine. I've done both on a very regular basis. So I'd probably double check with your players if you're going to run, whatever you're going to run, but especially with a module, hey, I'm thinking about running this thing which has this feel to it. You know, you guys put out Storm King's Thunder and the Curse of Strahd, and those have two different feels of a campaign. You know, hey, are you guys looking for killing giants or something evil and much darker and creepier? And, you know, seeing which way they want to go is helpful. Finding out the things they don't want to do. I always try to find out, okay, what are the things you're not comfortable role-playing? You know, here are the things I am not comfortable doing. You'll never find these things in my game. Just to kind of avoid some awkwardness and stumbling blocks. Yeah, and then if they haven't played before, I've just run like half hour, here's a D20, let's go games, just so everybody kind of gets a feel for things.
Nice. Chris, thoughts as well? When you start a campaign, what do you do to go about that?
Generally, I start with a kind of a setting in mind, particularly if I'm doing something homegrown that I'm building. But again, I like to start by putting myself in a box, right? And I give myself...
Literally?
Yeah, literally.
He's
I
a cat.
Crawl into a box.
Don't get out until my campaign is planned.
Yeah, and once I've got it all set, I can get out of the box. But seriously, I like to give myself some hard parameters. For example, the last game that I ran was kind of a post-apocalyptic fantasy where they're in a city that's in a ring and up in the mountains, and all they can see outside the the city walls is mist, and anybody who's ever gone outside into the mist has ever come back. So I made the characters all constables or friends of constables, and they had little capers inside the city. And so I literally created a box out of the city. Now, them wanting to be constables was something that they came up with. They wanted to explore that thing, and some of them wanted to be constables. And then, as you know, like in the real world, the police have like contractors, specialists that work with them, right? And we got all kinds of weird characters out of that. And so it felt kind of like a high fantasy version of like, I want to say like X-Files in that thing. But then you get to a point where you're like, okay, now I'm ready to kind of break out of this box. And then you create another box, and you link this box to that box, and you go there. So that's kind of how I start my planning when I'm creating my own campaign.
So, and this is very much a question I have.
Sure.
When I start campaigns, a lot of time there's an assumption that they're rays, right? They have a starting point and they go off into infinity.
Sure.
And a lot of times the campaigns, whether by their nature or just schedules, whatever, they're segments. You don't know how long the segment's going to be, but there it is. They will end. When you plan for your campaigns, do you plan them out as rays, or do you plan them out as segments? Or if you hope they're rays and there's an endpoint that comes up, folks leave town, leave the group, what have you, how do you prepare for a campaign that ends before you're ready for it? As I've gotten older, I have gotten into the practice of making my campaigns more episodic. Like the buddy cop movie with way too many buddies, right? And that way, if there's an end point or if there's a pause point, it's okay, because we can just pick up next time we want to play at that campaign with a new episode. So I really kind of like gearing my sessions that way if possible. And Lauren, do you plan campaigns to sort of have a ongoing state if needed, or do you have sort of finite ideas about them in mind?
I kind of do both because, you never know what's going to happen a year or two down the road with a gaming group. I've been incredibly lucky with a bunch of mine, and where we've Dungeon Drunks has been going for a couple years. My home game has been going for a couple years, but having chunks. Going back to your X-Files metaphor, having Monster of the Week stuff in between all of the mythology is kind of the way that I like it, or chapters, and where there's stuff going on in the world that could maybe have long-term consequences, but for now you guys are just going into this dungeon and solving this one thing. So having a little bit of both, I think, gives focus in the short term and excitement in the long term. But it's hard. It's super hard.
It's tough.
It's hard.
So campaigns that go for years, what level do you take them to? Do you ever hit a level cap in any of your campaigns, or do you spread it out where the progression is slow enough where it's manageable for you as a dungeon master, where you're not going to hit a wall or you're not going to get to an epic level area you might not be comfortable with?
I haven't reached epic level yet. The couple campaigns that I've been lucky enough to finish, they reached, a bunch of them were 4th edition campaigns, and they reached mid-teens. Dungeon Drunks started at 1, and there's 7. I've certainly sloped them a lot more as I've gotten better at being a DM. They get through the first couple levels much faster now. Get to 3 or 4 within couple weeks. And then it slows down a little bit, just because now as you get further and further into the progression, your characters get so much more powerful that the players need time to kind of get a handle on what they can do. But no, I haven't yet gotten to be able to fight a Trask just yet. I haven't been able to throw 3 beholders and a mind flayer army at them just yet. I'm working on it though. We'll see.
I would, but I'm kind of a jerk that way. My experiences are very similar in that most of my campaigns might get somewhere in the neighborhood of like 10th to 15th level at the most. I get to about 8th or 9th level with a campaign, and I start looking towards the end of it. They start trying to figure out, okay, what's that thing that's going to kind of wrap this story up. because I really think that campaigns need to have a beginning and middle and because as a dungeon master, it's more useful to me and more inspiring to me to get that opportunity to explore other stories that I haven't probably touched on yet. Like every time we put out an adventure, I'm like, ooh, here's the new shiny, and then we put another one, I'm like, oh, here's another shiny. And I'm very much like that character, the dog character in Up, squirrel. When it comes to adventure content, every time I see something new that's cool, I want to mess around with it.
And I think,
sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say for most home games, at least, it's a little different when you've got a live stream game and a set players and a set DM. It's a little bit different, but for my home game, I've been with that group for 7.5 years, and we rotate who DMs on a regular basis, which gives all of us a chance to tell our own stories and take breaks. So a lot of the time when our campaigns end, it's both a good thing and a bad thing. We've reached the end of the campaign. We're not all dead. This is awesome. And now someone else gets to take over. My husband just ran Curse of Strahd, and now I'm running Storm King's Thunder. We peppered in the middle of that with people had one-shots that they wanted to try. And I had a homebrew that I was giving it a try. So being able to rotate through all the players, when you're at home with a group where you're all comfortable is the best for everybody.
Yeah. That sounds also super rewarding just for players to have a rotation to become the dungeon master. Not necessarily in perpetuity, but to have that opportunity seems like it's a really rewarding chance to get in that seat for a while.
Having multiple dungeon masters in a group is definitely a boon if you can have it, make it happen. And then encouraging players who haven't dungeon mastered before to give it a shot, even if it's just for like an evening, is also good. So, like you starting Storm King's Thunder, I've been doing Storm King's Thunder with my group right up to the point where I had like a version of Tomb of Annihilation to kind of look at and play with, and I'm like, okay, so all of a sudden this weird death curse happens in my campaign setting, and the giants start receding. So I'm taking them from like not even midpoint in Storm King's Thunder and doing Tomb of Annihilation for a number of reasons. One, I really want to do Tomb of Annihilation. Two,
I wonder why.
Yeah, my players are discovering that giants hit really hard, and they want to be more powerful next time they encounter one that's really tough. They had a rough time with Chief Guh, so they are good to take. They're happy to take a break from trying to deal with giants and giant politics and go and do something different and maybe get some more experience under their belt, maybe get a little tougher, and then come back and deal with the giant thing again later on.
There you go.
A couple of questions, and for the folks in chat, if you had a question as well, please feel free to shout it out, just preface it with question. Again, from the Twitter in advance, William Aitken had asked, speaking of the higher level parties, how you create balanced challenges for the higher level parties. You had mentioned players sometimes have more power than maybe they know what to do with. So how do you find good and effective challenges for some of those higher level players?
Every character has a weakness, and it's making sure that I don't throw something at them that everybody has a weakness to, because then that's a TPK. But the barbarian that has more hit points than most of my monsters and can hit really hard and is super effective in battle probably can't hit the stuff that's flying. Or the ranger who is sitting in the back and able to pick off from anywhere probably doesn't have the best AC. And everyone all the balanced characters have some sort of strength and some sort of weakness, and so it's throwing the weakness at some of them and then making them change up how they normally do their fights. And then also a second round backup. Backup is my when things are
monster backup.
Monster backup, yeah. When
Right
when I'm rolling bad, you put together an encounter and you're like, okay, this is a nice little balanced encounter and it should be fun and it should be a challenge, but I shouldn't kill them. And then I start rolling 2s and my party is rolling 19s, and all right, so the goblins are going to get back up from some friends or something else is going to happen. Because it's no fun for anybody if they just roll over the encounter. I mean, every once in a while maybe, but most of the time they want to come out of a battle. but we did it. That's the best feeling. And
Sure.
if it's anything less than that, it's kind of anticlimactic.
Yeah, when I get to that higher level, I definitely start to introduce because the player characters start to feel so much more powerful at that point. I like to start introducing some superhero tropes into my fantasy campaign, where the villain likes to drop things on innocent bystanders and stuff like that. When all else fails, my policy is complicate things, make it as hard as possible for the characters to actually get at the villain by distracting them with other things on the side and constantly barraging them from different areas. I love. My villains at high level are generally highly intelligent, and they also spend an egregious amount of time planning the demise of the heroes. And by translation, that means I spend a lot of time planning for the demise of the heroes. And then I just start throwing things. Now, there's a point where I don't want to necessarily, because it is a fantasy campaign, just wipe them out. So if I get to a point in setting, there's a time when you can kind of pull back and say, okay, the villain here is thinking, I'm losing too many resources. Let's retreat a little bit and see what I can put together to throw at them next time. It's definitely a way of going.
So I'm pulling questions off of the chat. Thank you for sending them in. This is Sinfizz asks, what's the most memorable thing? I believe it's you've improvised in a session. It's written improved, but I'm going to take a stab that it's improvised. In the middle of a fight. If the villain is getting their butts kicked, how have you improvised the encounter?
The villain's getting their butt kicked. Besides backup. God, that's a hard one.
It's a stumper.
That's a good one, though.
I won't lie that, particularly if we're talking about high level still, that I take a free hand with what may or may not have happened in the background before the encounter actually happened. It's kind of like that. I treat all those really high level encounters like, what if you could go back in time and you can change that one thing or these other things, and maybe my villain did this thing beforehand and we had no idea. And then you just start saying, and you invent stuff on the spot that the villain had set up ahead of time to throw at the player characters, and you just pitch that in there to get in their way. I've had the furthest I've gone though is by making
This sounds like an admission about to come out.
The villain a doppelganger. Yeah. At one point in the encounter, that it went from being the actual villain to being the doppelganger of the villain, and then Chris had to retreat and figure out what happened after they finished killing off the doppelganger, and they were highly disappointed that it wasn't the actual villain, and that's just too bad.
I will say most of the improv that I'm super happy with tends to be role-playing, but Dungeon Drunks got in a fight. Well, it wasn't a fight. They had 32 giants they had to deal with in whatever way that they could. Well,
it's a long day.
Obviously, it was meant to be here's a group of giants. How do you convince them not to go attack this town in any way? And they came up with a really ingenious shadow play. Try to convince them there was a dragon who would claim this area and scare them all away. And so I had to decide how a bunch of really dumb hill giants were going to react to this thing. And basically the modifiers on their intelligence rolls made that super easy. They totally believed there was a dragon in their midst.
Right.
But then thinking at the very last minute, well, what's going to be their reaction to knowing there's this dragon? Well, yeah, some of them are going to attack. Some of them are going to get, and then it was, all right, I have to control this group of giants who are attacking a thing that doesn't exist. So they're throwing rocks at players, but not really. And so it's dangerous, but it's kind of also funny. And then there are giants that decide, nope, I'm out of here. So it was
very Three Amigos.
Kind of.
We need a false threat somehow.
It was deciding. It was this weird, I need to control these giants like this thing is really there. I need to control these giants like they're really scared of it, and that they all were convinced. They're all like, nope, there's a dragon over there. So that was an interesting DM challenge of how do I accurately portray what these characters are going to do And that turned into Improv Olympics of I'm fighting myself with something that doesn't exist. All right, here we go.
Awesome.
It was fun.
That would be hilarious.
Brave Steel had a question about how you go about organizing your campaign notes. You mentioned the scattered notes,
Yeah.
but whether during a session or between sessions, if there's a lot to track about your players or what have you, how do you organize things as a dungeon master?
Google Docs. Mm-hmm. I've gotten better with it. I've gotten a lot better with, after a game, sitting down and going, okay, this is what they did, and this is how much experience I gave them, and this is the things that they want to do in the next session, or their goals, and then coming back to that during the week or during the intervening time and going, okay, if these are the things they want to do, what do I have to prepare? Mm-hmm. I've gotten better at it, but I could still use a lot. So much of it is just I make it up as I go along, which is why I would love to get better at writing it down and then do something for DM's Guild and write things down. But I look at my notes and I go, I don't know what I was thinking. This never happened. I don't know why I wrote this down. So yeah, it's
very Indiana Jones. I'll just get on a horse and go after the trucks and see what happens.
Very much.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
Yes.
It's the only way I can keep up with them is I need to be putting the tracks down in front of the train as the train is moving, or else I don't know where we're going. And no one does.
Exactly. Yeah, that happens a lot. But if I do have ideas ahead of time, I am very I freeze in front of a computer when it comes to actually preparing my game. So 3x5 note cards with an idea on each note card tends to be useful to me. Mm-hmm. I also use them to track things like initiative and stuff like that, or anything else that comes along. So I keep whoever's making 3x5 note cards these days in business. I use a lot of them.
Caberlitz asks, do you let your players do a bit of table talk during battles to coordinate and plan things out, whether it's beforehand, like, hey, let's huddle up, or even during the midst of things during their turns? Do you let them, how much, if any, table talk do you allow for battle strategizing?
I'm pretty liberal as long as whatever they're talking about is stuff that the characters can either communicate to each other or is stuff that they know about each other. They all know that the wizard loves to throw fireballs and can sculpt the fire around them. So if he's planning on dropping it somewhere and they're going to coordinate where he's going to drop it, like, all right, they've worked with each other long enough that's just reasonable. If they can yell things out to each other on their turn, I really liked 4th edition, the battles and being tactical and all that. So I kind of would rather, as long as the role playing in that moment makes sense. Yeah. When it gets to, I'm going to tell you how you should act on your turn, that's when I shut it down. Yeah. And certainly as the battle progresses, if they're talking with each other, if they're coordinating, that's awesome. If it's, I'm going to do this, so I need you to do that, or you should do that, then nope.
Totally different.
Done.
Yeah. My table talk is okay in the same respect in my game. And generally, my players have been really good about if they need help, rather than telling somebody to do something specific, they, it's totally in character to be like, I'm over here and I'm in trouble and guys need a little help over here. And this is kind of leaving it up to the rest of the group or the individual players in the group who is going to provide help and how they're going to do it, right? But just making it clear that I'm in trouble, right, is totally fine. And then having that, maybe some of that banter around the table is also totally fine. They love to banter with me. I like to put on my evil persona when I'm playing with them, but I'm not really out to kill them mostly some of the time.
Roadblock Actual is on the chat, and he says he does like a fireball. We're getting close to the top of the hour, so before I hit the wall here myself, I did want to mention Dragon Plus, the next issue 15, is coming out at the end of this week. Subscribe on Android iOS or online at dragonmag.com. This is the cover for the issue 15 coming out. It's
Nice.
a bit of a board game focus, although we also have plenty of content on Tomb of Annihilation as well. We'll be showing off some excerpts and previews. So which is where I wanted to kind of ask next. And this, again, is a loaded question because I want to know the answer. I'm interested in starting up a Tomb of Annihilation campaign and knowing what you guys know about the campaign setting. And I think it's fairly public knowledge at this point. There's the death curse that's taking place in the world. It's preventing folks that have returned from the dead. They're slowly rotting away. If I'm interested in running this campaign, whether as written or modified, but at least within this campaign storyline, what tips or ideas might you have for setting up that type of situation or world events? How would you do it in your campaign?
So I am in the process of doing it in one of my campaigns as the head of the Adventurers League. I'm the dungeon master, I guess, of that entire deal. So, and one of the most important things about an adventure that takes an extremely aggressive stance against something like raising from the dead and stuff like that, which is extremely challenging because players will find it daunting, is to make sure that you take the time up front or in play up front when things are kind of lighter in the adventure to find ways to feed that information to the players so they understand what they're in for when they get going in this adventure. So they understand there's this death curse and here's what people have experienced because of this death curse. And so watch out, and just to kind of give them that heads up of maybe we should be a little more careful because of this death curse. Other than that, I would like any other adventure, I just prep it and run it. But yeah, giving them that for that thing that's going to be kind of key to the entire adventure, that's going to totally change how the game is played for a little while. Making sure they understand what the parameters of that are.
Okay.
And I think that death curse, the first time you come across a character that's suffering from it, that's all you really need. Whatever level party you're running, as soon as you come across the dying, decrepit form, and your characters are going to wonder what's going on, and that's the hook. And who that character is and where they find them there's a myriad different answers to that could come from anywhere, depending on, are you starting from the beginning? Is this a new group, or are you throwing this in the middle of a group that you've been playing with for a while? All of a sudden someone that they know is suffering from it, or it's some patron of theirs, or just, the barkeep down the way. So I think that's a good hook.
One of the images we put up just a second ago is from Adam Lee's fiction piece. It's regarding the guides as well. And I suppose, there they are.
Yay!
We've got the Vegapygmy and we have his partner. So one of the facets of the campaign setting is players playing through Tomb of Annihilation. It takes place in the jungles of Chult. It's very dangerous and very deadly. There's the option for guides to help I don't know if ease, but at least get you on the right path, steer you in the right direction based on where you think you want to go.
Yeah.
Is there an inherent challenge in encouraging your players to accept help? Do you tend to have players who would prefer to shoulder all burdens themselves? Or if guides are a fun and interesting facet for this campaign, how might you?
I'm being attacked by the
set. How might you best go about introducing guides as a concept in a way that your players would accept?
So in the group that I'm running right now, they have gotten to the point where they are they were looking for a guide, and I thought this would be a really simple process. In my back of my head, I guess I just thought, oh yeah, obviously we're going into the jungle. We've never been in the jungle before. We were going to need a guide, right?
Right.
And there's a way of getting basically collecting resumes of guides and then figuring out which one you want. I did not realize that it would become a serious discussion and even at some point argument amongst my players about which guide, if we're going to have a guide, what we're going to pay the guide, and all this other stuff. It was just like, it was incredible. It was a moment where I had to kind of sit back and just kind of watch them and see what it was they did. and then to make sure that as they're communicating and having this little debate as they're going over these things that they hadn't misconstrued anything that any information I give them previously, so they understood exactly like the nature and traits of each one of the guides that they were going, so they can make an informed decision on their guide experience.
Listen, the hiring and firing is the most important job of an HR generalist, and really, you have to go through a several-step process. Are you finding these people on Craigslist? Are you going to Indeed? How are you finding these guides? It's really important. Are they looking for long-term employment? It's super important for a guide to know what their long-term goals are. Where would you like to be in 5 years, besides not dead?
Besides not dead.
Yeah.
Have you used, I don't know, guides might be novel, but henchmen or hirelings in your game before? Have players expressed interest in adding to their crew in that way? Yeah,
Dungeon Drunks have definitely encouraged and dragged along a variety of NPCs that have shown up, and my main goal is always to at least figure out, does it make sense for these NPCs to go along, and then to put them in roles that are supportive, so that when they get into combat, that they're not the star. I've had so far they've had a bard and they've had a tanky fighter who is basically just going to stand in the middle of everything. So so that they are not getting a high level Gandalf coming on in and destroying everything, but they're getting a reliable person that they can count on, who they're still going to have to do a lot of the fighting work. And then the other thing is making sure that the stuff coming out of that character's mouth is true to character and isn't necessarily always correct, because I don't want them thinking that the character that I'm playing is just a voice for the DM, and if this character said it, then it must be true. So
right.
Trying to make sure that those characters have flaws.
Or I would imagine loyal to a point of opening any door or chest, regardless of threat to their own health. It's making sure that they also are taking risks that are appropriate to them as characters. They're not machines for the party to use, but they're actual NPCs.
I've had it go a couple of different ways. I've had it like that where they join the party, like running out of the abyss. There's a number of NPCs to join the party, and they all have their own motivations, and they're well detailed in the adventure, and they're really fun and exciting to play those characters. But as hirelings go, in the game I described before, where they're all in a city and they're either working for the constabulary or they're a constable themselves, I had one player character who was a doctor, and that person had a noble background, and they had 3 hirelings with them, and their hirelings had very clear parameters that player set, so that those hirelings wouldn't be necessarily put in harm's way. The primary function of those hirelings was, because it rained all the time in the city, was they each had their own umbrella, and they would hold them over the player character as they were walking down the street across the cobblestones. And so 3 umbrellas covering this character, who, if his hair ever got wet, went. So in that respect, they really added a lot of color and flavor to the character without actually detracting from the game.
I love in the old Dungeon Master's Guide, there was the guy who would hold the torch. So this is the guy who would hold the umbrella.
Yes.
Yep.
Very important.
I know all about hair going poof, so that's super important.
The bumper shooter. Is that a good name?
Totally.
So we're getting close to the top of the hour. Again, just thanks for everyone who's been watching for the Dragon Plus live stream. We're doing this every week. Right now, while Dice Camera Action is on a hiatus, we'll be doing it at this time, 4 to 5 p.m. When Dice Camera Action comes back, September 19th, we'll be moving to 2 p.m. Again, to touch base on the content going into the issues of Dragon Plus, but also the design, development, and the running of the D&D game content. This week, I really wanted to ask you guys about the running of the campaigns. So thank you very much for being with us today.
Thank you for having us.
Absolutely. And again, we did mention live stream games in the works, so look for news on that. Before we go, some of the additional content we have in this month's Dragon Plus. Every issue we reach back into old issues of Dragon Magazine, try and find content that's of interest and appeal. This issue, looking at board games, we looked at some of the old games that Dragon Magazine past had presented in its pages. So we pretty much recreated. We just laid it out in an updated fashion. We picked Clayorama, which is a bit of a game for folks that want to use little modeling clay elements around the tabletop. It's a fun little one-off game as well. And, of course, leading into Tomb of Annihilation and the Jungles of Chult, we also picked Dino Wars, where you can have plastic dinosaurs facing off against your little green army men.
Nice.
So look for that in this issue of Dragon Plus coming out later this month. So the softball question, of course, I wanted to end with is what board games might each of you be playing currently or have seen and are interested in playing? And we have the Tomb of Annihilation board game coming out from WizKids, so I'll throw that on the table. But let's say beyond what we're creating as well, any board game from any game designer that has your interest at the moment.
I have been playing. I think I might butcher the name on this. I think it's called Tokaido, which is a game about basically who has the best vacation on their path. It's really awesome, and it's really easy. It's easy to play. There are some simple strategies, and it's really fun. I've also been playing Tsuro quite a lot.
Oh, yeah.
The Path game, yeah. It's very meditative to play that game. I find it's very enjoyable. Yeah.
And Lauren?
There are so many I would love to play. My husband and I really enjoy $1 Million But from Rooster Teeth, which is it's a couple of cards and you get a bunch of friends together and $1 Million But. So that's kind of our go-to party game because it is so easy. And then
$1 Million But sounds like a show on the Health and Beauty Channel.
on the Lifetime Network.
On the Lifetime,
yeah. One of those doctor shows. The $1 Million But. $1 million. But
this is one of those eat shoots.
Now
and
I'm interested in this other
moments.
game that you're talking about.
yeah, I kind of want to make that. No, but we play that, and I really want to play Betrayal at Baldur's Gate.
Yes.
I really do. That looks so much fun.
It is fun. It is a lot of fun. So yes. Well, in any case, Chris Lindsay, Laura Urban, thank you so much for joining us again on another live stream of Dragon Plus. For folks watching, we will be doing a vodcast of the One Grung Above game that Chris Lindsay ran at the Stream of Annihilation with Laura Urban as one of the Grung players. What Grung were you? Did you have a color? What color Grung were you?
I'm the purple Grung.
Purple Grung.
I am Bangarang, which had so many apostrophes in it that I kept wanting to go ang. But yes, I'm middle management.
And this week as well, thanks to Pelham Green, our producer in the studio. We can't show him on camera. Someday we're going to drag him kicking and screaming in front of the camera. Yeah.
Oh, come on.
Trust me, if I've gotten dragged in front of the camera, you can too.
Well, just turn the camera one of these days. When he turns it on, it'll just be on him. It'll be great.
So from the offices at Wizards of the Coast, again, thanks for everyone from watching on the live stream, and thanks again, Chris and Lauren.
Thank you.